Hello, I am Tavian Hunter. I'm the Library and Archive Manager at Inova, and I would like to welcome you to our first closed reading and listening group, Beyond Bloodletting in Publishing, Examining Our Entrails, as part of our Research Network programme, Archipelagos in Reverse. This network brings together 6 research associates with associate partnership institutions including Lux, After All, Train, Shorthall Foundation and Tate to share their ongoing research in dialogue with others through a series of open conversations and collective study groups. This network aims to draw together different lines of inquiry into what the archipelagic means for a small-scale research institution such as Inova, through mapping forms of commonality to create new bodies of thought. This might be through thinking about the sonics, waves and movement, different forms of resistance, or drawing from writers of radical traditions and Black feminist thinkers who are represented in Inova's Shorthall Library and Archives. These collections are a rich resource of globalized discourse on the curatorial and artistic practice of artists and curators predominantly from Africa, the Caribbean, Asia and Latin America, with contemporary art and visual culture, and also critical theory on diasporic thought and intersectional identity theory. Since 2010, we have been growing a collection of artists, activists, and DIY zines and self-publishing, exploring different aspects of cultural diversity, race, identity, and community experiences. Last month, we launched a research network with our research associate, Rose Norden, specifically investigating publishing as research through a conversation exploring modes of distribution and access to printed material, the role of bootlegging or book piracy, and the introduction of Stuart, a new publishing platform and digital and design studio at Inova. Today we'll continue this conversation focusing on collective publishing practice with texts on Publishing as Bloodletting by Clara Bellegar and the text from Ulysses Carry-On, The New Art of Making Books, which focuses on the form of the book itself. I'm really excited for this collective reading, and I would like to introduce Rose, who will be leading the reading, and Clara, one of the authors of today's text. So Clara is a cultural worker and grey literature circulator. From 2010 to 2018, she articulated cultural programming with rural, peri-urban and diasporic communities from the Philippines through the Office of Culture and Design, a residency space and social practice platform. In 2013, she co-founded Hardworking, Good Looking, a cottage industry publishing house interested in the material vernacular, collectivizing authorship, and the value of the era. Currently, she heads the Social Practices Department at the William de Kooning Academy and teaches at Praetswerks Institute Experimental Publishing. Frequently, she operates under collective and individual aliases that intimate her stewardship in a given project, and the latest of which is To Be Determined, a transitional migratory neighborly structure of sleeper cells, Trojan horse networks that activate or deactivate for leaking access and cultural capital. Rose is a graphic designer and artist in residence at the Somerset House Studios in London. She's the founding member of UMC, which stands for One of My Kind, an art publishing collective focused on supporting self-publishing as a vehicle to independent validation of one's own culture, history, politics, and sense of self. Collectively, UMC runs a community risograph printing press called Abbots Road Press. Rose functions independently as an artist, graphic designer with an emphasis on publishing as a creative and social practice. She produces publications and printed matter, often embedded in educational projects, research residencies, or exhibitions. Rose has a focused interest in typography books as a site of collaboration and the book as an object of representation. So thank you both for being here, and I'll now pass over to Rose.
Thanks so much, Tavian. And hi, everyone. And thanks so much for coming, Clara. Like, Clara and I haven't met before, but I encountered the work during the first lockdown. And I think just the title, Publishing as Bloodletting, really captured my imagination. Like, I feel like that was enough to kind of have me like really fixated on everything else Clara had to say. And then, yeah, reading through it, there were certain aspects that spoke to me in that moment. The idea of sort of publishing as this as a bodily practice, and having come from like a string of like trips to different book fairs, like dragging books around, and then having to be really stationary. And away from my wider publishing collective that felt like the larger body that kind of circulated text. Felt like I was then having to shift my thinking on what this circulation was during lockdown. So it really, I feel like this text I've shared so widely with like my collective and people I collaborate with. So it's been really sitting with me since I think last May that I first read it, or there was a talk on it. But yeah, so we're going to go through, I've highlighted, it's lengthy and it's like really rich, but there's like a section that we're going to go through today. But there's also some acts, like some conversations scripted within it that are recorded that Clara shared with us. And maybe if it's cool with you, Clara, just to introduce those, like the format and how those came to be.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for the invitation, Rose, and Sepake as well, who's here, and yeah, Anai and Tavian. Yeah, thanks for. I'm not sure if the invitation also came from you, but anyway, thanks anyway. Yeah, just like a brief, this text is actually the second chapter, I guess, in like a longer meditation, you could call it, on thinking of something that I'm thinking through as the published body or the body public. And so it came, all of these like kind of meditations, I keep calling them meditations, they're just like long thoughts, I guess, that I've been having, were part of like this process of migration. So moving from the Philippines to the Netherlands, losing all of my landscape, I guess, and I very much connect with like the bio that was read about your work, Rose. So this idea of looking at publishing and the book as a form of self-representation and of valuing one's own culture. So the 5 sort of body parts that I've been looking at are the face or the cover as like a metaphor for tactics of assimilation, circulation, which is the text that we're going to go through today, the spine, and thinking of the spine as a secretarial function. The 4th is the guts, and thinking about it as a bovine, the guts, the interior of the book, as like a bovine rumination, thinking out loud, writing out loud, connecting to orality, and also thinking of publishing as an incremental process. And the last one, which I'm sort of, the last sort of meditation, which I'm beginning now, is on the foot, or the footnotes. And that's sort of about reversing the hierarchy between the canonical author and all the commentaries that can enrich and purge a text from things that we have outgrown. So yeah, I guess that's because we're going to go into like what we're going to listen to now are conversations. So while I was writing an essay, I realized that all of the people that I was chatting with on social media, like my friends, basically were enriching, were authoring along with me, like with all their recommendations and thoughts and feedback and disagreements. Like that became almost as important as the text itself. The text itself. So I ended up not delivering the text, the essay, in the lecture that I was going to give, but actually turning all those conversations into a play that suggest the content of the text. And it's like this idea of the difference between a text that is written and a text that is spoken. And how do you publish also, like, or when you have these public engagements, when you activate content, when you make it public with the body, then for me, there has to be like another layer, or it has to be different than just reading a text out loud. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Clara.
Great. Should I go ahead and do the screening now, Rose?
Yeah, please. Thanks, Anahi.
Can everyone see my screen okay? Can I just get a thumbs up? Great. All right. Wait, hold on. Sorry. Sorry. I think I need to share the sound, which I forgot to do. Hold on a second. Okay. Great.
Act 1, Prologue, the Disclaimer. This talk was written in a manner true to its subject, and true to the manner in which I often find myself working, on planes and trains and in hotel rooms, while circulating, in transit and in collaboration. With thanks to Ming Lin, Sami Hamana, Sugata Ray, Florian Kramer, Renan Laruan, and Simon Kentgens for listening, contributing, agreeing, disagreeing, and providing further readings.
Take 8. A few disclaimers, as I have registered offense at my use of words such as West and East and Center and Periphery. These are contested non-sites. Sometimes those who dwell in or have assimilated to centers of capital believe, or perhaps misunderstand, that these concepts are invoked as static places rather than ideological spaces/concepts, and assert that West, East, Center, and Periphery do not exist. Similar to those who assert that race does not exist, they are only half right. These are not static places, empirically identifiable with a GPS coordinate on a map, but they do exist in a hyperreal state. By West, I mean the hyperreal West, a term I heard from Indian art historian Sugata Ray at a conference panel in Hong Kong. The hyperreal West is a concept that was shoved down my post-colonial throat for most, if not all, of my formative years in the Philippines. The hyperreal West is a mythical dreamland, the only place where civilization could allegedly be found, and that I, as its colonial post-property, should bow down to in awful respect. Anyone who has grown up in a post-colony might recognize the shiny oppression of this place and understand the weight of it. The hyperreal West may not exist as the land promised, but it most certainly manifests noxious side effects. By periphery, I mean a mode of functioning, not a fixed site, but rather a condition determined by one's access to cultural capital and delineated by precarity. In his essay, An Impossible Profession, Filipino researcher and curator Renan Laruan thus describes the peripheral condition in the shadow of ever more prevalent politics of emergency/precarity/disaster/rescue/aid. Quote, "The assignment of the peripheral to a site is an unfulfilled death wish. It takes place with expediency, from the staging of threat towards the dramaturgical lines of safety. No one should be left behind here, and everyone must leave for elsewhere. In this lies a clear picture of the periphery as a space of constant alertness. Its only knowable time is emergency." End quote. By center, I mean one of many nodes of dominance that amass, even monopolize resources, as well as the legitimacy that the volume of those resources provide. By center, I also refer to the subjects that benefit from being in closest proximity to that capital. These subjects tend to be heard the loudest. And make no mistake, now that I'm living in Europe, and I've always been half Spanish, and having grown up as a member of the Philippine upper class, I count myself amongst them. These hyperreal places and states and phenomena exist, just like privilege, on a moving scale. Their meaning and borders change depending on where and by whom the measuring is done. If my use of these words offends you, I apologize. Also, if you're thinking it, please don't tell me to stop apologizing. Yes, this is a thing. I am asked in Europe and the United States to stop apologizing often enough that it starts to require a disclaimer on my end. It's how I was raised, a mark of provenance. Where I'm from, we apologize in small talk and in public settings as a form of politeness and deference. I'm sorry does not mean I think myself less than you. It means I honor your point of view, though we may disagree. It means I accept that I may be proven wrong. It is an allowance that both speaker and listener may occupy for saving face.
Act 2. WhatsApp, Sami Hamana and Ming Ling, Amsterdam, Hong Kong. At around 4 p.m. on the 9th of October 2019, while on the way to Hong Kong at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport, I had the following parallel and simultaneous conversations with two friends. Ming Lin is an artist and researcher who co-founded Display Distribute with Elaine W. Ho. Display Distribute is a publishing collective from Hong Kong that asserts in its practice that content is conflated with its means of circulation. I first read the sentence close to 3 years ago. It took me as long to fully understand its meaning. I was struck by its potential, but couldn't quite grasp what it meant in practice. That sentence, content is conflated with its means of circulation, jump-started a long meditation and talking cure on what it means to circulate books in an urgent manner. Ming and I met over Instagram or something to that effect. We met in person about a year or so later, after a lecture in London during which I struggled to keep tears from rolling down my face. I was nervous about being judged in a stodgy academic environment, as well as hyper-invested in what I was talking about. I hoped she hadn't noticed and overperformed cheerfulness.
Recording is on.
I think I've finally understood, after years of pondering, what conflating circulation to content means. Why publish if it doesn't circulate? And how can circulation itself be a form of content? It dawned on me in a meeting the other day talking about books that didn't circulate. So essentially, this is the workshop topic I'd love for you to work on. Also been thinking a lot about circulation of blood and circulation in the architectural sense, but that's just me. It doesn't have to go into your workshop, lol.
OMG, yes.
Bloodletting as a metaphor related to publishing.
You must read Money as Humor.
Who's it by?
Let me find.
Also, bloodletting as a possible model for circulating books in small but fat/engorged ways. Books as leeches.
Shigehisa Kiriyama. It's all about how, in the Japanese Edo period, people were obsessed with blood circulation, but the effects of economic success were literally impeding their flow of blood and making them ill because, they were literally eating too much and making their homes too heated.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting as a way to link value directly with the body.
God, I need time to write.
Check it out. Would defo love to work with you on this.
Cool. This also ties into the mosquito press thing. But redacted is drawing small amounts of blood and injecting disease / causing pain to the establishment, being a scourge. Mosquito press being the freedom presses during martial law rule in the Philippines when there was press censorship. Found out that scourge is the official name of a swarm of mosquitoes, but leeching is also an interesting concept.
Ah, yes, mosquitoes def have a role in this. Feral distributors.
Lol, true. I'm gonna see if I can rewrite the first part of my talk on the plane to talk about this. Let's see if I feel inspired, which I think I do. Can't find the text, Ming. Could you send it if you have it? I'm gonna buy interwebs on the plane.
Sorry, I'm at the hardware store.
Lol. It's okay, I found it.
Sweet. Look forward to discuss. Safe flight.
My other WhatsApp consultant on that day was Sami Hamana, an artist, researcher, and teacher at the Willem de Kooning Academy, entering the faculty through the Social Practices Department. Currently, he coordinates the school's honors program. Sami always dresses sharply in black suits, no matter the weather or occasion. We are often in each other's company, as we both firmly believe that study is a social pursuit, often punctuated by libations and other banalities such as manicures. Also, we share an undying appreciation for stupid puns.
Recording was on.
So I've been thinking a lot about blood circulation as a metaphor for publishing circulation. Besides mosquitoes, there's also the leech. Bloodletting, books as small packages that are fat / engorged when they drop, circulated to a small group with maximum contact during the publishing process. They let blood from the host for the host's supposed benefits, releasing ill humors. This is the model I definitely am functioning under. But bloodletting weakens the body. Book makes us conversing patience. My friend Ming from Display Distribute and I have been discussing this metaphor. She's into it, lol, and recommended a text on money as a humor by Shigehisa Kuriyama. It's all about how in the Edo period in Japan, in the 17th century, when money was introduced to their society in a period of great prosperity, the effects of economic success were supposedly, literally impeding their flow of blood and making them ill. They were too sedentary and eating too much and dying very frequently of knots in the stomach, which doctors at the time had never seen before with such frequency. They thought it was because of poor circulation, so they massively developed and innovated practices of massage to unknot the stomachs. Was also one of the most prolific eras of published medical treatises, embodied publishing as fuck. Also, books are leeches because you have to carry them with you.
Ah, I have met Ming Lin, right? Before. She's an alumni from Goldsmiths Center for Research Architecture as well. This makes sense.
Maybe you have, not through me though.
In that program, we had been reading a lot about Michel Serres' work on the parasite, etc.
Ah, yes. But I don't want to use that text too much because, you know, it's the same old people all the time.
Perhaps we can also think about the notion of bloodletting, a term that's heavily used in microeconomics.
And this seems a bit more urgent. What does it mean in microeconomics?
Slowly, by little, getting rid of employees, getting rid of branches in a company. Apparently, it also means this, bloodletting, in intense bear markets. Bloodletting occurs when a security or market declines significantly in price very quickly. See also panic sale. https://financialdictionary.thefreedictionary.com/bloodletting.
Interesting. But it supposes that the market/body is engorged. In this case, I would say the bookmaker is not engorged, but that the blood is thick, with research, with content, unexpelled humors.
Exactly. And of course, the notion of spreading through blood, parentheses, think about epidemics, diseases transferred through blood, etc., close parentheses. The notion of dissemination through blood is super close to the idea of making public and, by extension, publications.
And let's not forget the bleeding heart component of independent publishing, also paper cuts. I've only gotten one paper cut in all my years of publishing, and it was from mounting a box to ship my books to the Netherlands. Also, in the financial sense, bloodletting is a form of austerity, at least in how you described it. In the dictionary definition you provided, it's flooding the market with goods/content. In the way I'm thinking, it's not austerity, but rather controlled release of life force to generate nourishment, maximizing abundance or redirecting it to choice individuals, and not bleeding onto a market, but rather feeding, bleeding into a fleshy creature. Love that term that Renee Turner, another research lecturer at the Willem de Kooning Academy, used.
Act 3. Etherpad.
I think that's everything for the recording.
I can drop the link in case anybody wants to watch the whole thing. I can put it in the chat now.
Thanks for all your extra notes, Clara.
I do like to use the chat as another layer of information.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was great. I was really enjoying that.
Yeah, I was jumping through.
We can talk about, yeah. I mean, there's another text excerpt by Trinh Minh, an interview from Trinh Minh Ha, where she talks about suturing and unsuturing, and specifically like using subtitles in film as a form of unsuturing what happens, or unsuturing the wounds of untranslatability. I can drop that in the text, in the chat as well.
Yeah, please.
Rose, would you like me to just share the text so we can start reading?
Yeah, if you're ready, Anahi, thank you.
Great. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
So I think I should begin, no? Just the highlighted parts.
Yeah, if you just wanted to do the like the first paragraph or so, Clara, that relates to vanilla, and yeah, just you feel comfortable. Cool.
I can do that. And then afterwards, we all kind of, whoever wants just jumps in and reads.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll start. To live in Manila, if one dares to live at street level outside of air-conditioned bubbles, is to learn how to circulate through the cracks, even when they tell you it's impossible, even under punitive threat. It is to learn a certain kind of self-belief that lives in the muscles, allowing you to perform feats of the body beyond all rational frameworks of what the body is capable. It is to manifest mobility as an act of faith. It is to have the courage to cross 12-lane major highways as a pedestrian, bullfighting SUVs and 16-wheelers. It is to develop the cold blood to cross or simply lounge in neck-deep, E. coli-laden floodwater. In many ways, growing up in Manila prepares one quite well to make independently published books. You circulate madly, but feel like you're going nowhere. You have faith, but are constantly on the verge of giving up. You are full of life force, but also utterly exhausted and afraid all the time.
Dutch institutional circulatory ennui. Content and research as a humour by which to measure a culture's critical vitality. The blood within the body public, the publishing house, a humour that has become thick with access to cultural capital, heavy and sluggish with the re-cyclical management of knowledge, and in rare cases with the production of it. Indian activist and philosopher Sunil Sahasrabudhe writes that knowledge is only produced outside of academic or institutional environments. It is generated in the form of craft and informal technology, vernacular wisdom, socio-political effects and behaviour, data sets, effective currency, history unfolding, material culture, market flows, etc. at the street or popular level. Those in the high cognitive class merely manage knowledge, shuffling it around, stacking, reconfiguring, finding connections and leveraging and resulting conclusions, playing mahjong like my grandmother used to play with my great aunts on Sundays. But this cognitive class does not actually produce knowledge. The key, thus, to empowering those marginalized, those made to believe that they do not have any value, much less intellectual value, outside of being the menial labor force, is to position them as makers of knowledge. They could thus recognize themselves as sources who control and contribute, not just as fetishized victims to be mined of what they know and how they do. So thinkers and grant-giving bodies would certainly take offense at this assertion that knowledge cannot be produced by institutions, especially those steeped in and or otherwise seduced by Western and almost invariably phallic concepts of the intellectual genius. In his ivy-laden tower, somewhere in the seat of modernism, surrounded by chocolate bunnies, their discomfort at being stripped of a label of knowledge producers speaks volumes of cognitive institutionalization, and it's... Someone else can take over.
Reproductive. Oh, sorry. I'm going to back down.
Reproductive violence. Reproductive in the sense that the Western institution aims to produce endogamic copies of itself, equipped with an ISBN as birth certificate that establishes someone's divine parentage as author or editor. Since I moved to Europe and now, for the first time in my life, have academic institutional access, I was shocked to discover a dirty secret of Western schools. They publish expensive books that do not circulate. These books sit in boxes in the rooms of deans, directors, lectors, professors, and assorted fleshy creatures of the research community. These books, which to me seem quite expensive to produce, are entirely subsidized. Glossy as a fresh manicure, yet astonishingly cheap to purchase. They are so cheap, you can even pick them up for free. People shove them into your hands and beg you to take them away. I have 3 more boxes at home or in the research center or under my desk. These books are filthy secrets, public failures, knots in the stomach. They do not circulate. And because they do not move, it is assumed that nobody wants them.
Some of these books are vanities, uselessly large calling cards, travesties that might be called by euphemisms such as coffee table books or catalogues or monographs or retrospectives or collections of essays or readers. They may look more or less cosmetic, but what they share is a lack of vigor, which can currently manifest in the difficulty or impossibility of their circulation. They are often peppered with logos of credible cultural currency to no avail. They are unurgent, well-fed, and gone to flesh. They have not known the disquiet of hunger.
Some of these publications are actually quite interesting. You see some in smaller runs, published in-house on employee print cards or at the print workshops on campus, on glossless paper, on the company printer. Sometimes they're fancier publications with some pretty decent content, produced under reputable co-publishing schemes and 5-year research trajectories. They could circulate well. The content is strong, but they don't. They stack up in some kind of boxes that end up hidden in back rooms, a source of embarrassment, a mark of excess. Those back rooms become engaged with static wealths, useless accumulations, overly expensive research trinkets.
The humours and blood waves of the Western institution are thick with, and I'm not quite sure what at this point. As a once outsider looking in and now insider looking around, it's easy to say the blood has gravied with the fat of luxury that breeds complacency, that provokes a sedentary turn that corrupts into anxiety. To be fair, I have seen this same thing happen in colleges and universities and local government unit offices in the Philippines as well, except less, because there isn't always much money for publishing. But when they do print, they tend to go big, copies in the thousands, and the boxes, they stack just the same. To be even fairer, the first book I ever published suffered this fate. I sympathize with the pain of poor circulation. I remember it sharply as a complaint that manifests in my body as a stomachache or a pain in my heart.
To locate these pains of publishing within the stomach and the heart, the physical body, to write constantly rooted in the voice and experience of the I, the cognitive body, the I that I am, is not something academia quite likes, especially when its preferred gray matter, the thesis, preens for public debut. At this moment especially, it races to erase the personal, which is deemed vulgar, in favor of the abstraction, which I'm guessing has higher value within a framework that sees emotion, honesty, sweat, blood, tears, cursing, belly laughter, all these humors, as something to be hidden, too undignified to circulate. We talk about embodied knowledge, but rarely show the toll knowledge production, or is it management, takes on our bodies, the grotesque or unself-conscious shapes it twists us into. We talk about emotional labor as valuable. And maybe somebody else can pick up from emotional labor.
Emotional labor, a favorite battle cry for a certain kind of dusty wave feminist who excludes those who contradict her from the sacrosanct realm of Viliedi or Wesley Lady feminine liberation. This exclusion may be targeted at trans women or mothers or hijabi or, more insidiously, diasporic allies who disagree with their site-specific resentments that do not quite translate to other cultural contexts. Anyway, I was saying, emotional labor, despite it being waved around all the time as a fund-friendly flag of all trades, it still remains largely invisible in formal settings of study. When any signs of actual, effortful emotions arise, they are not given the dignified label of emotional labor. Rather, one is reprimanded for hysteria. That was inappropriate. That was too familiar. That was the show of weakness. That was uncalled for. Our humors are spit into polite handkerchiefs and shoved hastily back into pockets of files never shown, drastically edited, trashed altogether. It is a humor, like blood, that makes a mess and won't wash out. The stain of bodily humors recalls shame, especially if they have been left in the aftermath of defective wanting or reproductive desire.
As if emotional labor were only a matter of humiliation and suppression, rather than a highly intellectual set of skills applied to professional settings. In its first sociological definition, emotional labor was defined as a work to suppress emotion carried out in reaction to one's professional position in order to achieve a desired effect. Emotional labor was conceived as a smile of the flight attendant or fast food cashier who absorbs human rudeness because a customer is king. Surprisingly, we abide by this definition because we like to agree with the repeatedly fashionable sources in print, and yet lament the fact that emotional labor is relegated to some sort of low skill, non-intellectual, usually feminized, subservient position. Perhaps it is time to revise our definition of emotional labor in the frictionary.
Other humorous observations. Regarding published content as an ill humor manifesting in the body as sickness, sometimes of the blood itself. Today I boarded a plane for the 3rd time in 3 months and I was tired, bone tired. I've been living this way in sickly transit for 6 years, ever since I started generating content as a member of the body public. Books, for lack of a better word here, I understand the book in its expanded form beyond the traditional codex, require one to circulate, literally, physically with the body. Books do not carry themselves unless one belongs to a previously established empire of distributor infrastructure with its Romanic network of bookways and its colony of peaceful merchant retailers. Books must go on one's back, climb on one's limbs as leeches, as hand-carried items stuffed into one's suitcase in lieu of warm clothing. Hopefully the warm weather holds at my destination. My tropical heart shudders at the thought of book fair autumns, which count as winters as far as I'm concerned. Books at this juncture of the public body require one to perform their content. More and more, one does not simply write and print them. One sells their mode of production in lectures, conferences, interviews, hallways, studio visits, assorted networkeries. One performs the practice that begat them in classrooms, workshops, summer schools, universities, art schools, festivals, biennials, assemblies. One turns them into films, TV series, full-length albums, plays, musical reviews. The performative, or perhaps better said performatic, turn of publishing requires one to become a minstrel and go on tour to circulate and circumnavigate.
Excessive circulation causes all manner of illness, tumescence in the limbs. The long-haul threat of deep vein thrombosis from actual swelling of the legs that takes up to 2 days to subside after a cross-ocean flight. One herniated disc and another on the way, but you'd never tell from the way I swing my coffin-weight suitcases on and off trains and buses. And my faithful book fair season friend, anemia. The circulatory and other diseases that have peppered my publishing affliction are not the only illnesses I suffer. The largest fever of all is that of making the publications at all. Why engage in this quixotic folly from a country like the Philippines? Though reading literacy is quite high, critical literacy is maimed by a post-colonial and even pre-colonial value system that punishes independent thought as an attack on the social fabric itself. Why make text-heavy research publications in a country that has no interest in them? These books are, confoundingly, consumed most eagerly in the ex-colonial seats of power that they critique. To go against indoctrination, to be the single defective heliotrope in the field that looks away from the sun. Side note, I recently learned that sunflowers that do this are elderly. To diverge or divert one's gaze from that which our anointed intellectuals and/or groupthink tell us is important. This is treated as madness. Bookmakers as convalescing patients, stricken with psychosis.
Financially, also, we bleed out. Bookmaking is for fools who've willfully unsewn the bottoms of their pockets. What is also madness is the thickening of the waist, the engorgement of those who reside in centers of power. This madness is transferable to those who frequent centers of power, though they may reside in the periphery and may not be so healthy looking after a journey to the developed dreamlands. This is evident in the way their suitcases, swollen with their own publications on the journey westward or north-ish, almost burst with cultural capital in the form of publications on the way back home. Heavy gifts or compulsive purchases, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you lived as a mouse during your government-subsidized master's degree in Norway, losing half your weight because the subsidy didn't come on time most months, rationing your meal at 3 cookies and not much else per day. Doesn't matter that your home university in Manila now owns you for the next 5 years, and that you cannot travel overseas without their express permission until that period is over. By access to the center of knowledge, your privilege increases. Your waist is a full 4 sizes smaller, but you are now engorged. Now you are legally bound to recirculate the capital you have gained.
Publishing is bloodletting. Bloodletting is a form of redistribution of access to cultural capital, but also uncirculated or thickened blood as a sign of a sickness, a convalescence. Too much prosperity, too much fat leading to problems of the heart, prone to attacks, bodies of too much flesh, the need to eat leaner, leaving food on the table for those on the periphery, hungry for access, hungry, period. Just going to open up the chat.
Clara, can I just ask, on, you know, when you wrote "Why Lady," what was it like it was like an English writing in the accent? Is that?
A little bit, but also there's a meme term like white people, which is spelled like that. So it was just like, yeah, there's white people, but there should be white lady, and there should be also wet lady. So yeah, it's a little bit of memetics.
It'd be great to know what everybody thinks of that text, because there were just so many points that resonated with me, especially at the very beginning, when we're talking about kind of blood circulation as a metaphor for publication circulation. It's just really, really poignant for me.
I wanted to ask actually about this sort of discussion that you're having about performance of the book around the writing of it, sort of having to perform it as part of your yeah, I guess as the marketing, the selling, you have that really beautiful list of all the different actions. And I wanted to ask about this in relation to also performance as a type of publication in some senses. I was struck at the beginning with the very simple idea that you made quite clear, that publication is about making something public, and the simplicity of that. Yeah, I was really struck by that. Really, really enjoyed. Worked wonders in my brain. And yeah, just to ask about what space performance holds as a place of publication, both good in this, when you talk about people being able to just sort of kind of like perform out their work in, I guess, some kind of cultural context, and then performance around it where it seems a bit more annoying or frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, the going on tour thing is because like there's no subsidies at all in the Philippines. Like there's, I mean, there are some art subsidies, but yeah, if it's publishing, forget it. So yeah, you have to go on tour because you have to go to countries where there's money. So yeah, basically you have to, yeah, it's funny because you like make these like really site specific local books, but yeah, they're consumed, paid for and circulated, and there's just more interest, I mean, yeah, them elsewhere. So the minstrel like quality comes from there, I think. And then I like when I said like maybe it's not performative, it's performantic. It's more like I wanted to make the difference between this idea of linguistic performativity and the performance. So linguistic performativity in the sense that it's describing a reality in different words, and in that act of description changing the reality itself. Yeah, I think there's a bit of both in the form that we publish, like in historicizing, writing, publishing things about our vernacular culture in Manila specifically, or in other places that are invisible or that are unarchived, and giving us a point of reference that starts locally. So not having to do your research starting from a Western or Northern or whatever other country a point of view, and having to, and in that description of what you're seeing, because I'm not a researcher, I call myself that, but I'm actually not. Like I never finished university, so I'm not sanctioned by the canon. So I don't know. I think, and in terms of performance, I think like even what we're doing now, it's like we're reenacting. So publishing for me is like reenacting a text, and I think connecting to the other texts that we're supposed to read from Ulises Carrion, where he says that writers don't write books, they write texts. So the book in itself is for me a reenactment, and a reenactment in the sense that, yeah, sometimes you publish multiple editions, but also sometimes you have to bring it to life. And in that action, you make a public. You don't just make public, but you create the public. You create a community in a way, or that's what book fairs are to me. It's where I find my people. That's how we circulate our publications, using each other as vessels, in a way. And Tavia, and I don't remember what, this idea of bloodletting, like for me, it's, circulation, like I teach publishing also. And what I find striking is that circulation is always an afterthought. It's like, well, let's just make the book, but then who cares how it publishes? So what I'm trying to do, when we publish, circulation is the number, well, not the number one, but we always think of, okay, where is it going to go? And a lot of independent book publishers, they use the book fair. It's like, oh, book fair season means printing season. So you already know where you're going to circulate, but beyond the book fair, there's many other ways. So you have to, for me, like the form of circulation impacts the way that we print, the way that we design, how much we print, and sometimes how I write. Allowing the writing to be affected by the material conditions of the publication is also an interesting proposition for me as a writer.
Mm-hmm. And Clara, like when you are like in the process of bringing it to life, like in the distribution or like the social performative stage, like does it matter what part you played in before? Like, because I really feel like when I'm the designer for a publication, it's like all my energy has gone into like the birthing of it, and when I'm having to then take it out into the world and introduce it, I don't have the capacity, because I've given it my whole life for however long. And so the collective really steps in there, where they take on the process of like parading it around, while I need distance from it because I'm sort of repulsed by it once it's come out of me, and then I have to return to it and then do the whole like social, like I have to become reacquainted with the book and then start to speak on it, like speak around it, and sit at tables and talk to people about it, like it hasn't totally destroyed me.
I think it's I call that postnatal depression.
I was thinking of the bleed.
With a friend of mine who I mentioned in the chat, Amy Sewell, who we teach together in XPub, or Experimental Publishing in Piet-Zwart Institute in Rotterdam. We actually call ourselves the midwives. So we approach the process of birthing, like the process of publishing as a process of birth, and use all of these, like, birthing, reproductive metaphors. I mean, it started off as a joke, like we just got stoned and we're preparing our lessons and we're like, we're midwives, like we're trying to sort of find, it's a very, the XPub is a very, it's focused on like digital publishing as well. So, and sort of like this world of like programming, coding is sort of a bit male dominated. So we were trying to like make a joke and like, here we are, the crazy women. But it's turned into an actual, I think a critical position on our part, the years. But indeed, there is this, I mean, in Hardworking, Good Looking, we have, we're now 4 people. We used to be 2. So me and Christian Hansen. And then now we have Dante Carlos and Zar Christoph. So we often do this passing of the baton. And somebody asked me the other day, what's your process? How do you work together? It's like, we just step in when somebody's tired.
Yeah.
Like it's a constant, you know, seeing who's got energy. Oh, I'm tired. I can't do this. I'm exhausted. It's like, okay, then even halfway into a project, we'll just bring in the reinforcements. So definitely it's like, yeah, you have to have like midwives and doulas and like, you know, people like feeding you ice chips, like, and this idea of midwifery, like for us as educators, also it was a way of like pushing back the parental position, like this kind of treating the students as children, and your parental modes. It's actually, no, they're the parents. They are the ones who are engaged in the labor of reproduction and production. So what we are is we're, you know, we're there to, kind of, as a midwife, you support during the gestation, and then at the end you come in and you help them push, which they may not always appreciate. So,
I think like internally in UMC, like we would always use the idea of the like our zines being our ugly babies, like from like when we were much younger. The publications that came out of us are probably the ones that had the most energy, but also we weren't that fluent in how to do it, so they were like the ugly ones we're sort of ashamed of, but they're like our first ones that are most precious. And as like an all-female collective, I think we don't talk about that to like the outside world, but that's definitely how we refer to them.
Yeah, you do kind of outgrow. I mean, that's I'm almost happy that we publish always in short, small runs. Like you outgrow what you publish, and often like my postnatal depression grows over the years. And like when you go back to a text you've written and there's even one word, one turn of phrase that you're like, I've outgrown these thoughts, or I'm ashamed to have had this thought. And then it's like, okay, well, now how do you purge this? Like, how can the book not be a funeral casket of like, you know, thoughts that you just, or that are dead to you? And how do you kind of inject life back into them, and correct yourself? But yeah, I feel like I just, some of the publications, I just,
Yeah, same. And I think that's what's like quite forgiving about making series as well as like short runs, is that like if it's part of a series, then you can kind of you can redeem yourself in the next one.
Yeah.
That feels in quite stark opposition to the description that I really enjoyed that you gave of the academic publishers who have who are always trying to flog their books to you, and they've got sort of like 10 or 15 boxes, and they're always trying to give up. I found that very very instructive. It feels like the practice that both of you are describing feels very distinct from very different, like the complete opposite in some ways.
And Clara, how have you found, like during lockdown, like I was speaking to you a little bit about before, like have you found that because you speak about like the physical impact that like being nomadic with like publications, what that has on you, and then I really found that not doing that anymore, it's difficult to make a distinction if it was like a process of healing or just like weakening. For being absent from those spaces and like not moving in the same way?
I mean, I've really sort of leaned into the possibilities of, I mean, maybe because at Hardworking with Looking, I mean, and even with OCD, like all living in the Philippines and then having your kind of, this international network, like working online was, and all of us live in 4 different, so we're 4 in the publishing house, all of us live in different cities, the worst possible combination of time zones as well. So to me, it's natural. And in the Philippines, we have also a very big migrant community. Like they make up like 11%, like the people who work abroad and then remit money back home. I think they make up, their remittances make 11% of the country's GDP. So it's a country that is used to having at least one member of the family abroad. So to me, this is somewhat natural. So I think it's interesting, like the possibilities of also taking these moments, like these, mostly I do lectures now, or like, yeah, mostly just like online lectures. So I really like the possibility of, and I am trying to write orally now. So kind of like reconnect with this, what I'm calling a latent gene, like a latent pre-colonial talent for orality, for storytelling. So I think it's quite interesting. You're able to record yourself, re-record, layer, the chat function. The for my hyperactive like brain, I think is also a new form that I'm quite happy to explore. So maybe print has taken a bit of a backseat. It has anyway since I left the Philippines, because that was the printing place, not just the source of the content, but actually the source of the body, the material of the, it's just not the same to print here with, yeah, it's just not the same. So yeah, I'm thinking of how else you can circulate ideas. And this particular essay, it was like, I think when I was traveling and making lectures, like I would basically just print the essay, and then if it was 200 copies, 150, 70. So I think I probably circulated about 800 copies of this essay, which is the largest run ever for anything that we've ever printed. So and not thinking of, oh, I need to publish a book, like, and it needs to take forever and it needs to have all of this shit. It's like, actually, no, you can do it on Microsoft Word, and you can just, yeah, it's another form of, for me, the most like high, it's a high circulation because it's more portable.
Did you attend any online book fairs, Clara?
One, but it felt, I mean, yeah, it wasn't, or two actually, but not as an exhibitor, because, yeah, but as like a participant, invited guest, whatever. It was, yeah, it felt more like a symposium. So it's not really the same when you're not seated next to two people and there's no flesh. So it's not a fair, really. I don't know what it is. It was nice, but yeah, sad.
Yeah, I sat in like a lonely room where like I was like a lonely breakout room where people could just come in and have a chat about my publications, but nobody did.
Oh no. Good eye.
Are there any comments on the text from anybody else?
I was thinking, I really loved it, first of all, and I was thinking about how it made me think, about the construction of value and like what makes a text transmissible. And I feel like, you know, under capitalism, we think of a book, you know, in relation to a text as something to be bought and sold, something that is something, you know, that circulates in the market. And I think so much about like DIY forms of publishing and other kind of methods that really try to disrupt that and try to disconnect publishing or disconnect the book as an object from this idea that what makes a book successful is a kind of wide print run, or what makes a book successful is it passing through many hands, or like being reviewed, or, you know, entering into the mainstream cultural landscape. And I was wondering, you know, what other people's thoughts were on that, because I think actually because of, you know, hegemonic structures, because of the way that we think about the things that we make, it's really hard actually to detach that idea of success from a success dictated by that cultural landscape.
Does anybody else want to respond? I feel like I've filled up a lot of air.
Yeah. For me.
I would just put it out that I feel very seen by the question. I feel like I definitely struggle to detach the sense of value from the way you describe it as the sort of like the longer runs and the hegemonic structure of the publishing industry being something that gives value to writers and I guess designers as well. Broader thoughts I'd have to sit on, I'm afraid.
We often talk about like print on demand, but I think the way we approach it more is like print according to the demand. So to the first run for us is usually between 40 and 60 issues. And then back when we used to have book fairs, we would just go to one book fair. We would just go to the New York Art Book Fair because it was the biggest one. Wasn't the one with the most street cred, but we had the imperative to circulate and to try and recoup something. Like we already knew all of the work, like because we would do the research as well. So we would do all these projects, like projects that would span 2 years, 6 months, 3 years. So there was a lot of work and just so yeah, we would take first edition to one book fair, and if it sold out, then it was like, okay, so now we need to make a second edition. And then the second editions would be around 100, 150. I think the most we've ever printed of something is 250. And after 9 years, I think the most we've ever produced of one single publication is 3 editions. And we've decided that the third edition is the last, always. And after that, the book gets released into the wild as a digital copy. So it's like, yeah, recognizing that the people that we do these projects with, the researchers, the subjects who give all this content, yeah, we are extracting from them in publishing our research about them. So like this tension between those who create the knowledge. I think it was mentioned, this coming from an essay by Sunil Sahasrabudhe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So the ones who create the knowledge are the people on the streets, basically. So knowledge is produced on an everyday street level. We're the ones who like generate the data and create the knowledge. And in like institutions, the only thing that's happened is a shuffling. It's a management of this knowledge. So taking this into account, it's like, all right, what's the cap on our profit? Bookmaking, we know, is a non-profit. Like it's not just a non-profit, it's a sub-profit industry. So we know that, but we do get other things. So I have the job that I have right now because of all the work that I did for 9 years in the Philippines. So there was a cultural capital that I gained. So at some point, yeah, you have to, I don't know, for me, bookmaking it's not about profit or it's not about financial profit. It's about the social profit. And I think, yeah, we've also, we're thinking of killing the publishing house. And people are like, why? You know, it's like, it's successful. I mean, successful. It's like this idea of like, you struggled so long for visibility and finally you're somewhat visible, and then your visibility casts a shadow on someone else. So yeah, I mean, I often say like the only sustainable industry is the one that dies. So yeah, this idea of death and killing off projects and announcing it, actually. So this is what we call our process of assisted suicide. Like 1 year prior, you start announcing to all your friends, family, and loved ones that, hey, this is going to end, but it will reincarnate. So thinking of the publishing house now more like a school. Like if you become an academic through publishing, and then once you're an academic, you remain one through publishing. Yeah, why not cut out the middleman and just consider the publishing house as the source of study and as the form of study. So yeah, just profits. And you have to make some money, but yeah, all of us have day jobs. We do this as our side racket. So it's more laborious, but yeah, we've long ago, we let go of the idea of ever breaking even.
Clara, it's funny you talk about like announcing a death or like acknowledging that there needs to be an end, because because I think like we've been talking a lot in UMCA around how we started as a collective that was a biannual publication, and without announcing it, we just stopped publishing that. Like we just stopped publishing for that project that initiated our collective, and instead of announcing it, we're just sort of, there's just this like ghostly figure of this zine, and people still inquire about it, but we're never too definitive about it being over, because it's sort of like it served its purpose for the audience we were speaking to, but also it served this other purpose of like putting us in a particular space that meant we could publish whatever we kind of wanted to at that point. So yeah, it had this other value, like it just led us down, it put us in certain spaces, like a social, it had this social value, but it ran its course, like it had to end in order for that value to be, for us to have space and time to engage with that value.
I feel like also, just following on from what you both said, that's maybe what makes a text like truly transmissible. When you're not beholden to the kind of profit margin, then you're able, I guess you have more agency in, you know, how the text circulates, how it's formed in the world. It makes me think of you know, the pamphlets that were like printed out that had like revolutionary theory or revolutionary demands and circulated to you know, members of the proletariat or whatever. Like that to me is like making publishing useful again. Not that use is like maybe not the best framework to put it in, but I feel like once you kind of shun the excess that is demanded of you by the profit margin, then so much more possibility opens up for like what the text might be able to generate, which is hard to get to, but when you get there, it must be freeing in some sense.
Yeah, and Lola, I think that's why we wanted to initiate the printing press as like our main project after like establishing the publication, because it just meant that we were cutting out, or for small projects that we wanted to do, we were cutting out having to go to a printer, and there was just this real like collaborative like space to produce work that just felt really like we were building our own ecosystem for publishing, that we were hosting the fairs that made the deadlines, and we were also printing the work, and we were also kind of like supporting other people in getting their work published too. So it felt like, yeah, all those stages of production, like slowly trying to get some kind of like autonomy over those, felt really, it felt really kind of powerful, like you said.
There's this idea, I mean, like, yeah, this idea of like the missed opportunity of a death, I think or at least, yeah, when you don't, when something kind of peters out, then it's almost like there is no closure. There are these sorts of like things that were left unsaid, or like, or things that were never achieved. So I think, for me, maybe because when I started all like this work in this cultural work, it was also fruit of a death in the family. So it was like a big life change that I made after my mother died. So for me, death has been instructive in a way. So I think this process of closure that it provides to actually say it's done, it's finished, and also this joy in with now Dante, Christian, and Zar actually thinking about, oh, what will we do next? So rather than killing it because we hate each other, because whatever, like because we're tired and we can't do it anymore, it's just like, actually, no, let's talk about our death. And we've never had a website, but now Christian has been threatening to do a website for years. So now we're thinking of finally doing our website and presenting it as a tombstone, like as something that's, yeah, this is what we did. And now that it's all here in one place, now that it's exhibited, now it's dead. I think, yeah, this possibility of doing something new with each other, with all of the growth that's happened and all of the frictions and love and, like, yeah, kind of new territories that have been built between us. It's really actually quite a joyful thing to rediscover what it's like to work with each other, because there's a birth. and an impending death.
If anyone has any last comments before we move on to the next text, I think, because I'm just noticing it's 7:20. So if anyone has any last comments to share, please do now. If not, I think we can move on, but I'm going to leave the door open for any last comments or a response to also Clara's comment just now. Yeah. Great. So on that, I will screen share and it will be kind of like the first text, if that sounds okay. Rose, does that sound okay to you?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't introduce the text, Rose. Maybe you can just let us know what the text is.
Yeah, it's The New Art of Making Books by Julius Carrion, and I think Clara just like made reference to this in like the initial introduction. Just examining the book as an object, and there's kind of several like chapters or like sections to this, but we're just kind of going through the first with the time that we have, and maybe I'll just do like the first couple paragraphs and we can just jump around. It's really short. So The New Art of Making Books, what a book is. A book is a sequence of spaces. Each of these spaces is perceived at a different moment. A book is also a sequence of moments. A book is not a case of words, nor a bag of words, nor a bearer of words. A writer, contrary to the popular opinion, does not write books. A writer writes texts. The fact that a text is contained in a book comes only from the dimensions of such a text, or in the case of a series of short texts, poems, for instance, from their number.
A literary prose text contained in a book ignores the fact that the book is an autonomous space-time sequence, a series of more or less short texts, poems or other, distributed through a book following any particular ordering reveals the sequential nature of the book. It reveals it, perhaps uses it, but it does not incorporate it or assemble it.
Written language is a sequence of signs expanding within the space, the reading of which occurs in the time. A book is a space-time sequence. Books existed originally as containers of literary texts, but books seen as autonomous realities can contain any written language, not only literary language, or even any other system of signs.
Among languages, literary language, prose and poetry is not the best fitted to the nature of books. A book may be the accidental container of a text, the structure of which is irrelevant to the book. These are the books of bookshops and libraries. A book can also exist as an autonomous and self-sufficient form, including perhaps a text that emphasizes that form, a text that is an organic part of that form. Here begins the new art of making books.
In the old art, the writer judges himself as being not responsible for the book. He writes the text. The rest is done by the servants, the artisans, the workers, the others. In the new art writing, a text is only the first link in the chain going from the writer to the reader. In the new art, the writer assumes the responsibility for the whole process.
In the old arts, the writer writes texts. In the new arts, the writer makes books. To make a book is to actualize its ideal space-time sequence by means of the creation of a parallel sequence of signs, be it linguistic or other.
That was the excerpt, I think, Rose, that you chose.
Yeah. And I think like probably like the main point from that kind of struck me, or I felt was relevant to the idea of Stuart as like this collective publishing practice, was that maybe previously the writer was separated from the others that were involved in the process of publishing. So yeah, when it was referring to like designers or editors as the servants, these like these like separate bodies, the idea of bringing it into one, and how when we were speaking around Stuart or the publications that we're making in Innover now, it's these kind of very close sessions of like think-ins, and the design being informed by conversations with all the contributors. Just this kind of, while it's maybe not all on the writer, that we're all playing like one, we're all sharing kind of the role. Yeah, and I'd be excited to hear what everybody thinks of that text.
What do you understand as the new art and the old art? I guess I was trying to understand the distinctions between.
I guess just considering the book as a form of art. So there's kind of more context to there's like more writing around this, and there's also like a really beautiful diagram, Sapake, of kind of the old and the new that was being defined by him. And just considering the book as an object, or like an art object, and freeing it from like the limitations of like communication.
I guess I was just struck by the kind of extended role of the writer.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, that was the part actually that I felt quite, it's been quite liberating. I mean, if you put a gun to my head, I do many things, but if you put a gun to my head and ask me to pick, what do you do? I would say I'm a writer. Like that's the thing that I was doing when I was 5 years old. So I think becoming a publisher and learning how to do graphic design, and also actually when I learned to edit video, there was this kind of just opening of another universe of how I could write. And specifically with the software also, like I started editing years ago with Final Cut, and it struck me how the timeline was so intuitively recognizable to me. It was, oh, I understand what I'm doing. It's copy, paste. Copy, cut, paste. And it's, I had this like synesthetic experience of like realizing that what I was doing was writing. I was telling a story. I was just using a different software and a different kind of visual language. And the same thing happened to me, a similar thing, or at least I found it similarly intuitive to work on InDesign, perhaps because it's like ideated for publishing. So the influence of actually being in control of how the writing is presented was a super fundamental shift for me as a writer, and to start thinking about writing with the form in mind, and to be able to control that form or participate, because you don't actually ever do it all on your own, and participate from the start to the finish, and that role of the writer, the synesthetic writer within the publishing house, I think was quite, and you don't just write, you also present the text. You're there reading it with people, you're hawking it to people, you're always, what happens to it after? Like, how can you turn the book into a party? In a way, like to simplify it. So I think that's the part of the text that I felt identified with. I'm like, oh yeah, like writing is not just sitting at your desk, or writing is living and making. It's a material practice and a social practice for me.
Mentioned about the copy, cut, paste, it also made me realize also, I guess, and also I suppose this is also from the process, but the importance of the editor, which is almost like an invisible role. Like you don't really see the work of the editor, but presented in the book in a way, but you see it it's a process. I see it as a process, and it's a dialogue with the writer. So it's also like, I think, because I was just thinking about the fact that knowing that there are all these other people that work on a publication has been really freeing for writing for me, because it means like, you know, what I'm going to write's not going to be the final form because there's going to be all this other conversation that kind of makes it beautiful. So it's also, I guess, the recognition. We don't call it a colophon in England. I don't know what we call it, but the importance of the credits, let's say, of all the different people that have made this form of the book.
I just wanted to add, Clara, what you said about like the collective in publishing is interesting, because previous to this year, my experience writing was strangely like I had only done like collective writing and like assemblies or, you know, like organizing groups. And that process of writing is really different, because someone will draft something and someone will draft like over that, and it's just that process until it like matches what we want it to say. And oftentimes it's like on a time crunch because we're trying to respond to something that's happened 2 days ago. But it's always been really collective. But recently I've started to write by myself, and Sefake, I relate a lot to this. I'd never been edited before by someone I didn't know. And I thought I wasn't sure how I would take it, but actually it's like such a relief to know that someone's like wanting to collaborate with your text. And so I like the looking at writing and publishing as a collective exercise a lot, because I think, yeah, it's just how I was introduced to it, I guess.
But also just recognizing then actually also how important the graphics designer is in all of that, because like even if like the text is like edited beautifully and you're like, yes, this is fantastic, and then the form, like if it doesn't work on the page, it's just like you just feel like crying. Because you're like, in your mind you're like, this is going to be so amazing, and then when it comes to you in a way that you're not really, I don't know, that doesn't really invite you in, then it's also like you're like, oh, there was so much potential.
It's giving the text, it's like dignifying the text. Like there's so much amazing scholarship that comes out of the Philippines, and then when you see the book and you're just like, really, this is what you're going to do with it? Like they have given you gold and you have wrapped it in shit. Like it's I've learned to like actually appreciate some of the graphic forms that have come out of like Philippine academia. It ages well, I guess, but then when you see like the contemporary, it's changing actually, like thank God it's changing, but yeah, it was a downer and really undignified. I think it was, for me, graphic design is dignifying. It's a dignification. That should be for us, it's like, no, it's just, let's give it the pedestal it deserves.
Yeah, and it's funny because in a lot of book fairs, like the kind of like the London Book Fair at Whitechapel, you see the opposite, where it's like these over-designed nothing content, you know, and that there's like this, there's like this strange imbalance of legitimizing just like a really self-indulgent, like piece of snippet of content like from someone's desktop, and it's like glorified in a way that's unnecessary.
I have to say that I'm a massive fan of like shameless processing. Like once I found that you could have like red staples, for example, I was like, oh yeah, we need that. Like that's necessary. Like I don't understand why I didn't know about red staples.
I also had this epiphany with colored staples. I'm like, why aren't all staples colored?
I recently just received a book that is the where the pages are all green. Actually, every single page is green, and it's text by her name is Sophia Almeria, and and it's kind of like her collected blog works, and somehow, oh my god, yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, and somehow it's a really interesting turn to feel like you're entering the virtual world of, I don't know if you feel the same experience, but when I've just started delving into it, I feel like I'm entering into this sort of like virtual matrixy space through the book, you know, rather than through the screen, which is such a bizarre experience to have.
I Actually, I was going to ask about that because, you know, there's a lot of text speak in the text, actually, the first text that we wrote, you know, like with the LOLs and I was just thinking about, I don't know, somehow, like, does it still work for you? Like, or is it something that's, because the thing is, it's like, there's no way of denying that as that kind of speech, as speech that has been like passed to each other through WhatsApp, you know, like, I mean, it's quite interesting also just to see like all these different social platforms being used as a form of publishing, right? So like how people use Twitter or even Facebook in some ways as a space to kind of publish or to circulate ideas or thinking. And then what happens then? Like, is it still translatable when it goes into this form? It's quite interesting to hear. Is it Hamza?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting to hear that the book is able to still help you enter into that space. I'm just, I guess thinking about the translation of different spaces and where texts are written or circulated.
I think somehow because it doesn't have the sort of like bluish glare of the screen, and it chooses an alternative color, that somehow feels much more transformative to me than wondering about the publication of say the sort of like texts are all on social media platforms, are all clothed in, they all have this like very specific clothing, that this like chat bubble clothing that just kind of changes my understanding of reading a text. I find it hard to see because of the apparatus around the text itself. It feels impossible to see it as anything but contained within the platform. I don't know if that makes any sense.
This really,
does that make any sense?
It does, because I don't know if anyone knows of the artist Tara Fatehi Irani. I can drop her stuff in chat, but she published a book based on a project. And in the project, she took images for 365 days and posted them on Instagram, and then like would hashtag the Instagram photos. And alongside that, she also did a performance. So she's a performer and a archivist and all these things. And kind of the last phase of the project was creating a book, and the book has all of the images from Instagram, but she's also added how many likes they have and like the hashtags, but she's added none of the formatting. So it's this really nice book, and you have an image, but you know, it also says liked by so-and-so, and it has all these hashtags. And whilst I was flicking through it, I had exactly the same experience that you did, Hamza, where it was like, it feels naked somehow, and it makes less sense to me. And hashtags, I keep thinking about hashtags and how hashtags work when they're not interactive and things like that.
Interesting to think about what how to redesign those texts, and like the way you describe it, I also feel like that it feels naked when things are taken away from it, and I wonder what it looks like in different clothes and what those different clothes would be, that would make it feel frankly less like awfully corporate. I'm not a designer.
I'm thinking also that the hashtags are sort of like a natural index. Like, I mean, that kind of form also exists in the book, or like a cross-reference or an index, so that there is this sort of, not a one-to-one translation, but I also find that, like, I mean, I dropped the link of Ming Lin and Canal Street Research. So she uses Instagram as a research surface. And we talk a lot about like how it's actually really interesting, I mean, to write in these forms that are truncated. So you have a word limit. It's not that much different from writing when you have a word limit. But what for me is different, like writing on a Vimeo description, writing an essay on a Vimeo video description, or in an Instagram post. First of all, for me, it's a really good peer review. So people comment, people tell you when you've made mistakes. You can, as every kind of chunk of the text or whatever text that you're writing appears, people, you have this like, kind of crowd wisdom that's helping you proofread the text essentially. And it trains another form of writing because you can't often see the whole text. You can only see the line that you're writing. Depends on the kind of digital platform that you're using, because it's not meant to write essays. It's meant to write 300 words max. So it also like brings me back to when I would write on an electric typewriter and just see like the line that I was typing. So it trains the eye, or like the eye of the editor is trained in a different way. And for me, what happens is I have to just publish, come back. It's very wiki, I guess, also, and very WordPress. So this idea of I publish, I look, I publish, I look. So this kind of going back and forth between what you write and how the writing appears. So that's a very different writing muscle, I think, requiring an obsessive patience. What did Anahi, or what did you mean by digital archaeological site?
Just, I guess, thinking about like, because you said indexing, which is interesting, but I also always find that when you hashtag on an Instagram post and like go back, so for example, going back to Tara's project, a funny one was like live art, because I think in live art spaces, live art means something very particular. Whereas on Instagram, live art means people drawing in real time, or, a video of someone drawing. And so suddenly your image is like buried in like all of these different meanings. And I mean, same as other things. So, if a performance was hashtagged as, I don't know, like lake or cemetery or a location, suddenly it's like buried, it like is indexed alongside other things. Which is, I think, a really interesting non-linear way of like, because that's suddenly kind of very web-like, like a web of meaning, which is interesting. And it's an archaeological site just because you can go back and it becomes buried after some time, which is interesting.
I wanted to ask, this line in the text, among languages, literary language, prose and poetry is not the best fitted to the nature of books. And I just wondered if it's boggling my brain a little bit, and I just wondered what people think about it, and what people think, I guess, what does suit the nature of books.
Good question.
Could we see that sentence maybe again?
Oh, sorry, I think it's just been posted in the chat.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Clara.
For me, this relates to the other quote, which is a writer doesn't write text. Sorry, a writer doesn't write books, a writer writes text. So when I think of, when I read this line, I think about the paper that we use when we print in Manila. It's a very specific kind of newsprint that you don't find in like the global West, global North, wherever. It's very particular. So it is the paper itself, the quality of the paper, the sponginess. It's like thick and spongy, and it's much. We have one book that's like 500 pages, and every time somebody picks it up, they're like, oh, "It's so much lighter than I expected it would be." So for me, the language is in the material, perhaps. Like how can the clay that you use to make the book, like how can the material body of the book, it has its own language. It's very different that's why I would say it's very different to print in Manila with the means of production that are available there and the materials. It's very different to print here. It almost feels like, what am I doing? Like, so the loss of that the loss of that native material or indigenous material, for me, is part of the language of the book, and maybe that's the language that Carrion is talking about in this. I don't know if anybody has any other interpretations.
I was just thinking about whether I was just thinking about orality actually versus printed matter, and how I don't know. I over the lockdown, I've been like asking people to read texts to me. Like I always feel they're much more felt when they are carried by a voice, and I think potentially, while a book is maybe a good carrier of those texts, I always feel like, as a language, I feel like prose and poetry are much more about orality for me. But that's
I think I can definitely agree with you there. That the long oral histories, I think of Pakistani culture, there's like a long oral history of performed poetry and performed literature that dates back, many hundreds of years. And I guess it was part of the discussion earlier as well about performance as a type of publication. And then I guess when we talk about that, we're looking at publication that's fleeting versus publication that seeks permanence, or material publication in book. Does that seek a permanence that performative publication doesn't, or big question marks?
Yeah, I think. In terms of then, you were just saying about spoken poetry to be, there's a kind of tradition around it.
Yeah.
In Pakistan. Did you say Pakistan?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
I was just wondering how much like memory is like, because I was just thinking about, I don't know about you guys, but my memory is rubbish. Like it used to be pretty good, but it's actually not even as good as my mother. And my mother like has Alzheimer's, but she can still remember prose and poetry from her primary school.
Wow.
If you asked me to recite something, I'd probably be like Humpty Dumpty or something, I would, so just in terms of like how, I'm wondering how books have maybe, or other things as well, other technologies have also changed that relationship to orality. Because I feel like the printed matter somehow has a much more improved, like a higher status somehow than orality or performance, because it's like almost become like, maybe because of legality or something, but whereas I think orality is fleeting, it's ephemeral. So, and it relies on repetition, and it relies on you to be able to hear it, or to be able to repeat it. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just
yeah. Well, there's like this room for it to change as it is, as it's retold. I think is really nice. Like even through mistakes. Like I think even the way you explained the story of how you named this reading group Sepake, it was like you misread it, and then it took on a new meaning, and maybe through like more like immediate publishing, like the and like I don't know, like smudges on a photocopier, or kind of the immediacy just creates kind of like conversation generation, rather than like a year-long project that is like polished and final.
Maybe like the book and other, not maybe, but the book and other technologies, our cell phones, especially like, and like search engines and Google, like they eliminate the need to remember. I think, forgetfulness, like, and when you write orally, you cannot, it's this exercise of memory, and you, at least I use recordings as a way to remember what I just said, and then in the second iteration, kind of, it's maybe in oral writing there is more space for forgetting, and then when you forget, it's like a little chasm where you can make something new. And I feel like books, something that is printed, especially digitally, it's so unmoving. If you don't have access to the back end, it just becomes so permanent, and you can never take it down. You don't have a right. Yeah, this idea of the right to be forgotten, the right to edit also. Like you lose all of that when you when the words are in print.
I can relate to this the way that you describe it as sort of in a moment of like maybe forgetting, you open up these new possibilities of producing in the process of, say, performing something orally. I think it's really vital and exciting and energizing moment that I struggle to have writing text that I somehow imagine needs to be embodied in a book and not embodied by a body. And there is this sort of distinction, always drawing the distinction there and never knowing exactly why certain texts must be spoken and performed and learned and never really written down. Or written down only to be learned, and then texts that have to be bounded with a spine, as you say.
Yeah, I think it relates back to like the right to be forgotten, also to the idea of a natural death, or there needing to be a death.
Also, I think it, like what everyone's saying, makes me think about like our reliance on kind of like alphanumeric code. And I feel like what this text opens up is the possibility of the book meaning more than just like words and language and like graphemes, and how we understand the ways that we communicate with each other. I feel like to understand the book as this attempt to actualize an ideal like space-time sequence is to maybe like abandon like linearity and abandon language and, you know, embrace performance, as has been said before, and embrace like other embodied ways of knowing that can sit like parallel to language or can, you know, overtake it entirely.
And then the role of the book in that is as a sort of like a title, or like or it takes on a new meaning in that sense, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I think like that's maybe, yeah, in my reading, that's the distinction. Like that's what is kind of gotten at when you would write something like, you know, literary language is not best fitted to the nature of books, because I think that maybe what's being hinted at is this idea that books are a much, or can be, or should be a much more expansive vehicle, kind of like bursting on our understandings of ourselves and others and the ways that we communicate to each other. I think maybe like the book is a container for so much more than just the text, or so much more than just literary prose and language. And that's what it means to connect, like to seriously connect the writer to the process of making the book as well.
That's a very beautiful layer of understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point for us to end on, actually. Got only 5 minutes left, and I just really want to say, you know, thank you for this unique and fun conversation that we've been having. It's given me a lot of food for thought about kind of the notion of the book itself, especially as a librarian, and my responsibility of collecting, especially self-publishing DIY publications that are divorced from kind of academic publishing, as said in the text today. And I've really loved the kind of performality and of this conversation, especially using the Zoom functionality as an additional form of reenacting these published texts, and additional layer to information about them as well. So I want to thank.
Sorry, do you think you could save the chat?
Yeah, I will. I will save it, and we can put it towards the recording of this, but we're just going to put into the chat as well a link to our feedback survey. It'd be really great to, you know, hear your thoughts on this event, and what you'd like to see more of as well. But let's give a, you know, round of applause to both Rose and Clara.
No, thanks so much, Clara.
Thank you for the invitation. It was super nice. Like, I think this is it was super nice to hear the text written out loud. I was getting all choked. It was a very emotional text for me to write, I think, and like to hear other people speaking it out loud was like, yeah, it took me back to the writing. So thank you for that. Thank you for the feels.
Thanks, Clara.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Definitely been a vibe.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Very much enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
How do I do this?